welcome to Mimamsa Perspectives. Mimamsa and Indic Inquiry is a portal where we attempt to study and research aspects which are critical to understand India. At Mimamsa, we have developed a four-pillar template which we believe is a critical to understand India comprehensively. The four pillars, which are Vijnana, Darshana, Itihasa, and Sambhasha, individually study aspects like India's scientific and knowledge systems, India's spiritual and philosophical heritage, India's history, and India's socio-political and economic thought individually, and which is based in Indic value systems. And we do that through well-researched articles, research projects, interviews, podcasts, and much more. In the same endeavor today, we have with us a very special guest. We have with us Shri Ram Madhavji. Shri Ram Madhav today is the National Executive Member of Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. He is also the member of governing board at India Foundation, which is a well-known public policy advocacy and research think tank based in New Delhi. Previously, he was the National General Secretary of BJP, and with his stint in politics, he was handling one of the critical issues like Kashmir, Assam, apart from defending and actually advocating the policies and politics of the government. Apart from that, he's a well-known public intellectual who has contributed and continues to contribute various articles, issues in well-reputed national and international newspapers. He has also authored several books in English as well as in Telugu language. And his most recent book, Because India Comes First, is going to be our topic for discussion today. This is where we'll begin. And thank you, Ram Madhavji, for joining us, and congratulations for a wonderful book.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be there in this session with you all today.
Thank you, sir. At the outset, I really want to begin with something which actually generated my curiosity. It was the title of your book. It begins Because India Comes First. And in a way, it was tantalizing in a sense to think as to what was author thinking, in a sense, while it sort of begins from the middle, because India comes first. So what were you thinking? Is it a response to something? Is it a response to any particular thought? What were your ideas before you actually choose that title?
Look, India Comes First is about one's conviction. You ask anybody, any leader in India, he will say the same thing, that for him, India, nation comes first. But it is at one level, it's a conviction. At another level, it's just a political statement. Mm-hmm. But because India comes first is about the courage of conviction. Mm-hmm. Conviction is one thing, and to have the courage of conviction, meaning translating that conviction into action, is what really makes a leader a true leader. This book talks about that courage of conviction of people belonging to a particular school of thought, namely the nationalist school of thought, who not only have a vision for the country, for the nation, but they have the courage to walk that vision, implement that vision. So in this particular compilation of my essays, I have highlighted several such important decisions, important instances, important chapters in our history where the leaders of this nationalist school of thought have not only talked about great ideals, but also courageously, boldly implemented them. So that is why the caption is more about our conviction and courage of conviction, not merely about a political statement or not merely about just a sentiment.
Right, that's interesting. And I think what you pointed out is important when you say that it is actually a version of a school of thought which is generally identified as a nationalist school of thought in the Indian public discourse. Which brings me to my next point. It is actually a very curious combination of articles and essays which you have written for last few years. If I was to think of it, it's like an entourage of variety of ideas centered around a common theme of Indian public discourse. But it is again a collection of ideas which represents a particular school of thought. As you rightly pointed out, it is a nationalist school of thought. In the general political parlance, we sort of call it as a right conservative voices. In a sense, is it right to then contextualize your book, as a conservative ideas to the contemporary discourse? Because the range of issues that you have dealt is so vast in terms of democracy, its institution, to strategy and foreign policy, and everything in between, which resonates with Indian public discourse. And it is also your individual take on it, but you also represent an institution, an ideology. So, am I right in understanding that this book, if anyone wants to look at what is the Indian conservatives thinking about particular issues, let's peep into this book, and it's sort of as a comprehensive conservative account of contemporary discourse.
So this division of conservatism and liberalism,
Mhm.
it was a division created during the or immediately after the Enlightenment era in Europe.
True.
It became a political parlance in the West.
Mhm.
I really don't know if it really applies to countries like India, which have had a very long tradition of uh, polity, of social life, of culture, of civilization, extending over several millennia.
Mhm.
Let me tell you, the classical liberal ideas,
Mhm.
including individual freedom, democracy, human rights, and the economic liberty,
Mhm.
liberal economic ideas. These are all very well the conservative ideas of India, the so-called conservative ideas of India. The right-left distinction, if you extend to India, the
Mhm.
nationalist school of thought is always positioned as India's right or India's conservatives.
Right.
But the India's so-called right, the so-called conservative, is the most liberal, classical liberal movement.
True.
So my first objection to this categorization is that it doesn't really apply to a civilizational nation like India. See, you must remember that there are nations and nations in the world.
Mhm.
There are nation states which were a creation of last 200 years of history in the West. They had this distinction. Some of them were sitting in the left, on the left. It was actually a vocabulary that came into existence after the French Revolution. When one side of the French Revolution, the rightists were supporting the existing regime of the royals, the other side was opposing, the left side was opposing the royals. That was simply the division that got extended to the entire political spectrum there. So that division, which was applicable to nation states, would it really apply to civilizational states like ours? I really don't think so. So, if you ask me what is your identity, I will say our identity is nation first identity. You can call us as nationalist school of thought. Again, the word nationalist or nationalism has different connotations in different contexts. If you take it to the Europe in the last century, it became a very pejorative word in the middle of the last century, nationalism. Although, again, I would say another 50 years back, you rewind by another 50 years, Bismarck was a great nationalist hero in the same Germany, same Western Europe. But thanks to two world wars, nationalism became a very pejorative kind of thing there. So their nationalism, their understanding of it from a very nation state perspective doesn't really apply to India again. So when I say nationalist school of thought, this is a very quintessential Indian expression. It is, you can categorize it as right and conservative, but it is the most classical liberal thought process.
Right. Well, I agree with you. The conservatism is essentially an idea which is society specific, and as societies change, the ideas of that should also change. And when in an Indian context, liberalism and conservatism has always been hand in hand. In fact, the idea which is the in social idea itself is individual centric in its spiritual cultural context. But I asked in a very in a very general sense, that uh, often it happens, and please tell me if you agree with me, that it is generally believed that the conservative or the nationalist discourse in the politics of India has largely been a rhetorical, as opposed to a left liberal which has been trying to fashion a very academic arguments. In sense of conservatism, we had a very solid conservative critic of socialism at the high time of socialism, 70s and 80s. We have a very valuable and very strong center-right voice in security and strategic affairs. But when we come to political and social, spheres, this is where sometimes the discourse or the counter argument sometimes borders on rhetoric and not on substance, which is why sometimes the credibility is questioned. For instance, someone like Ram Gua has written, where are right intellectuals? In a sense, almost disparagingly saying that there are none. In fact, there were once upon a time in India. But so, do you think that there is certain gap in actually, if not expressing, but conceptualizing a proper discourse which can be rooted, as you say, in the nationalist school of thought? And in a way, this book is trying to do that.
First of all, we must remember that maybe people like Ram Guha would question us as to where are right intellectuals. I would question where are the true liberal intellectuals. These intellectuals are all pseudo-liberals.
Mm-hmm.
They do not really follow the classical liberal ideas
Mm-hmm.
of Adam Smith or John Locke.
Mm-hmm.
They are neoliberals. Neoliberals are the ones who practice identity politics.
Right.
They are the rank identity politics people. So they are not true liberals at all. None. My question to them is, where are true liberals in this world today? And this problem that you are raising
Mm-hmm.
is not just a problem for India alone. It's a global problem. When it comes to academic arguments or basically presence in the academic institutions and all, the left liberal, neoliberal elements have taken a lead. They have taken control of certain important intellectual institutions all over the world, not just in India, but all over the world. Now, the challenge that you pose or the question that you raise is, where are coherent, substantive arguments from the other side? My point is, where is the space for those arguments? There are any number of solid, coherent, deeply researched, profoundly researched arguments of the nationalist, culture-centric, civilization-centric school of thought. But the very liberals who claim to be liberals do not just allow any space for that school of thought, those ideas to come up on the table. Do you know, these neoliberals create cabals in institutions, and they blame the conservatives or the nationalists as fascists. But do you know, they are the real fascists. They cry from rooftops when somebody challenges them, but they don't allow any other voice to raise which is in contradiction to their thinking. They simply call you all sorts of names. They call you revisionist. They call you obscurantist. They call you communalist. They call you, conservative. They use different types of pejoratives and simply dismiss you. This is what the neoliberals do today. Neoliberals are real fascists. That's why they say that, where are real right intellectuals? And when some right intellectual stands up, they will simply dismiss him. They will call him all sorts of names. They don't allow him space in academy. They eject them. Even if they try to enter, they eject them. Having said it, having characterized their behavior, I admit on one count that probably yes, the nationalist intelligentsia has to work harder in the given climate to come up with more academic work, more solid work based on reason rather than on emotion. You need to come up with, you have such excellent knowledge base. You need to work hard and come up with ideas that are very contemporary, but that are articulated in a very contemporary framework that appeals to the present generation. There, probably more work is needed on the side of the nationalist intellectuals, but don't think that there is no right-wing intellectual because Mr. Ram has said so. It is people like Ramgopal who do not allow the other viewpoint to really come up.
Right. That's it's interesting argument. That there is this discourse which is supposed to be very free and academic in its nature. Sometimes get very much intertwined by politics, and also sometimes we use, like you pointed out very rightly, that the templates which have been created in West, probably suiting their societies, have been directly incorporated by India, and sometimes that leads to a lot of confusion. I think you also, in your book, mentions a very curious case of, an article, your interview with Al Jazeera, and your mention of Akhand Bharat, and how that was, sort of misconstrued, probably willfully, and that created some confusion because the sort of superimposition of that idea with contemporary nation-state system sort of created a lot of problem, which is why I wanted to ask you that there is a legitimate problem in terms of sometimes conceptualizing these ideas like nation. When you come to India, conceptualization of nation has been a very difficult, if not difficult, but a very complex issue. We have had different ideas of nation. There is a school of thought who has propagated a very constitutional sort of nationalism, abiding to the constitution, but there people have argued that the nation predates constitution way back, which is why I wanted to ask you then, how does one, you've mentioned concept like civilizational state, how does one approach the issue of nation, and how does your conceptualization of nation defines its contours for a student like us to get us a feel as to what this school of thought is propagating in terms of idea?
Firstly, we all have to come out of any guilt consciousness that we are unable to define our nation properly. Remember, the nation discourse in the entire Western world is only of 200 to 250 years old. And this whole discourse began after the formation of the nation states, which effectively succeeded in coming out of the stranglehold of the church, the Catholic Church. When that process happened after the Enlightenment era, the whole question of what constitutes a nation, how does a nation state come into existence, started as an academic discussion in the West. There was no discussion about it before that. And let me tell you, 250 years have thoroughly studied the discourse in the West. Even today, the West could not come to a consensus on what constitutes a nation or what is the basis for the formation of a nation state. The result is today in America, scholars like Samuel Huntington are writing books with the title, Who Are We? His last book was titled as Who Are We? After all, what do you mean when you call we are Americans? What is that Americanism? They are confused. You are seeing the history of United Kingdom in the last 200 years, how many times it has changed its shape, its form. And today also, they are not sure whether Scotland will still remain a part of UK or not, the one nation or not. The whole nation state question is a very complicated issue that entire West is today struggling with. Come to India, we are having some kind of a problem with these words that we imported from the Western vocabulary. One of them is nation. As I said, the moment you say nation in Europe, they will immediately remember a Hitler and a Mussolini. Unless you talk about nation states, simply you say a nation, they will only remember the German national, pride or the Italian fascism. Whereas here, we had the concept of Rashtra. In India, nation's near equivalent word is Rashtra. Rashtra is not what nation is all about in the West. But yes, if you want a near equivalent word, it is Rashtram. Here, Rashtram is an evolution over millennia. It's a consciousness. In fact, a very wonderful word used by Dr. Ambedkar for it was that in India, nationalism is a spiritual idea. This is the word that Ambedkar used. A spiritual consciousness that has only one mission, one objective, which is Abhyudayam, welfare of the of course, community, but the entire creation. That is the basis on which the entire nationhood of societies like India is developed. India, prior to 1947, was never under one political rule. Yet, did not India exist? Did not a national identity exist here? It did. But what was that national identity? It was not political. It was civilizational, cultural, which Ambedkar described as spiritual. That's the reason why, remember, when India was about to become independent, when Gandhi was asked about his vision for India, his instant response was that India should become, I want India to become a Ramarajya. Now, Ramarajya, in fact, he himself says that I don't mean, by Ramarajya, I don't mean India should become a theocratic state, but a state that is based, a nation that is based on a value system.
Right.
Not just certain political ideas, not just a racial identity. You know, in Europe, racial identity, language, and politics became the basis for the creation of nation states. Whereas we said, no, they cannot be the basis. It is much wider, much deeper. So Indian nationhood is millennia old. It has evolved through a great penance in the sense, not meditation, lot of churning of minds, lot of discussion. We came up with the idea of certain value system. That value system, which we call a civilizational value system, and its manifest form we describe as dharma. That value system of the civilization and its manifest form of dharma is the basis of the rastram here, national identity here. It is that identity which guides us at every stage. In fact, I'm sorry I'm taking a longer time, but when Constituent Assembly met to discuss about the features of Indian Constitution, do you know that two important questions arose? One was whether we should mention about God in the Constitution,
Yes.
in the name of God or something like that, whether we should say. The response of majority of the members was, no, we should not do that, because in India, we worship God in different forms.
Right.
Form, formless, Ishvara, Nirishvara, and Ardhanarishvara. So, in fact, it's a very interesting debate, because one lady member gets up and says, you can't use only God, you also should have the word goddess also. Then the chair intervenes and says, no, in India, God means goddess also. Then he says, these are the kind of debates that took place.
Right.
Then when the question of whether India should adopt secularism, dharma nirapekshata, as its founding principle in the constitution, the unanimous opinion in the Constituent Assembly was, no, there is no need for it. Because we are giving the constitution to a society which has always been secular.
Right.
You don't have to make a secular society out of it. It has always been secular. Its value system is secular, which respects all traditions, which respects all diversity. So there is no need to have a secular word in the constitution. Why I'm saying this is, even while making the constitution, the guiding inspiration for making the constitution also was this value system.
Right.
So the nation that we call as Rastram is an ancient identity of this country, which is responsible for the evolution of number of institutions, including the great constitution to which we all are committed to, and we all abide by it today.
Right. So it is an interesting point which you bring, that nation is an ancient concept. Indian nation is also an ancient. But somehow nationalism is more of a modern, if I'm right in understanding that nationalism is more of a contemporary or a modern concept, which sort of was making people aware of that identity. And I think that is where various school of thought existed, which is where one school of thought, making conscious of that identity or the civilizational component is what, and is it therefore then fair to say, this is what the label is generally ascribed to, that this is a cultural nationalism, something which has been identified with BJP as well as with RSS, the label of cultural nationalism? Is it then fair?
Okay. We used that phrase cultural nationalism or Hindutva or Hindu Rashtra in our vocabulary. It is a very typical vocabulary of the Indian nationalist school of thought. But can you explain to me, what Gandhi meant when he claimed himself to be a Sanatani Hindu? Can you explain to me what was that soul of the nation to which Jawaharlal Nehru had referred to in his Tryst with Destiny lecture? Do you know, when we talk about Nehru's Tryst with Destiny speech on the 15th of August 1947, we only emphasize on that one phrase, tryst with destiny. In fact, that's not the right phrase you should look at in that speech. Towards the end of that small speech, he talks about a long suppressed soul of the nation awakening.
Right.
What is that soul that he was talking about? That was the civilizational cultural soul of this nation, my friend.
Right.
Everybody understood it. It's another matter that had Gandhi been alive, probably he would have pushed us in the direction of appreciating this cultural and civilizational identity of our nationhood a little more pronounced way, in a little more pronounced way. Nehru, being a person influenced more by the Western or European ideas, remember, that was a period when every right thinking person was being influenced by those European ideas, because we were just out of that great Second World War. We had a different kind of world scenario at that time. We had seen bad consequences of ugly nationalism of Hitler and Mussolini. So the romantic idea at that time was that we should be internationalists and we should have certain different type of political ideologies. That had influenced Nehru initially. Fair enough, that's a different discussion. But what we call as cultural nationalism was appreciated by everybody at that time also. That's why I quoted Ambedkar. He called it spiritual nationalism. But here I must mention one very interesting thing. In Indian constitution, you do not come across the word nation at all. There is no word nation in Indian constitution. It doesn't make constitution less relevant or anything. But the preamble says, we, the people of India. Then Article 1 describes India as a union of states. People who are involved in the constitution making asked Ambedkar, why should we ape the American constitution? Why should we call ourselves a people of India? Because American constitution begins with the statement, we the people of the United States of America. So why should we ape it? Why not we call ourselves as we the nation of India? You know, the reply given by Dr. Ambedkar was, look, I appreciate your sentiment, but in India, we still lack that sense of national consciousness. We lack that. We have to build that national consciousness, or probably rebuild that. And he says nationalism is not a political idea. It is to be a spiritual idea that needs to be built in this nation. This was even Ambedkar had said at that time. Now, since you mentioned about it a little while ago, I would now say that 70 years it took for us to appreciate the very core, what Nehru described as the soul of this country, very core of this national identity, namely the cultural, civilizational identity of this nation. It took 70 years for us. But today, largely, the whole country appreciates it. Aam Aadmi Party wants to send elderly people in Delhi on a pilgrimage to Ayodhya. A government which used to, criticize the Ayodhya movement and all that. So there is a wider appreciation about its rooted cultural oneness.
Right.
From here, we have to know march forward, having established its national identity firmly as a cultural and civilizational identity. The next school of thought has to now move forward and build institutions.
Right, and this is very rightly pointed out that at the mass level or at the popular level, that identity has somehow been accepted consciously, subconsciously, and I think the BJP's success in a way sort of exemplifies that. In a way, in democracy, that is the biggest legitimacy you can get from the people. But then I just want to add a question to that. Why do you think it took 7 decades? I mean, even in the general parlance, that idea was somehow got lost. Do you think, was it a conscious, a subconscious thing? Why that conception, which was so natural to the people of the founding members of Indian Republic, like Gandhi or Nehru, why, when it was so natural to them, where did it got lost?
I tell you, in Mahabharata, Bhishma Pitamaha makes a very profound statement to Yudhishthira in Shanti Parva. He says, Raja Kalasya Karanam. It is the rulers who are responsible for the times. Unfortunately, post the independence, the leadership that we got was hell-bent on imposing the non-Indian ideas on the society here. So the last several decades, especially the initial decades after the independence, were lost in this whole exercise of aping, imitating the ideas which were very raw in the West itself. I told you, even the nationalism debate is still not effectively concluded in the West, but we adopted those ideas. We tried to impose them on Indian society. Did Indian society internalize them? I would say no. It never internalized them. But since Raja is the most powerful institution, the government is imposing them, the society simply tolerated them. But look at the life of average Indian. When in 1950s, a simple effort was made by RSS cadres to get support for cow protection, which was very dear to Mahatma Gandhi ji, which is there in our directive principles. A simple effort was made. Do you know how many signatures could be collected? 27 million signatures were collected. I'm talking about 1950s when the population was around 30 crore, 300 million. Simple. So that was the kind of support people gave when Vivekananda Memorial was being built at Kanyakumari. Cutting across political parties, more than 300 members of parliament came forward to support that initiative. So the India's soul has always been spiritual, cultural, and civilizational. There was a superimposition of certain political ideology in the name of modernity or whatever you call it. What actually happened now was that we have come out of the camouflage. We have shaken off that overtly imposed kind of ideology, and when it was again overturned by the Raja himself, the ruling establishment itself, people were very happy to join in chorus with the government. Today, the Raja and Praja are on the same page. We are all on the same page when it comes to appreciating India's cultural and civilizational identity. Country, as I have seen it in the last, I'm 55 today, so take it as 40, 45 years of my life. I have seen it. I come to only one conclusion: India is at its core a very conservative nation, very culturally, civilizationally inspired nation.
So in a way that the political movement which culminated in the prime ministership of Modi, in a way was a beginning of, if may say, an inception point culturally into the social psyche of India. If I'm right in interpreting that, the 2014.
Partly yes, because the ground for it was prepared by many others over decades.
Yes.
The imposition of the Western ideas on this Indian society, that effort was not small. That effort was being driven by most powerful leaders like Jawaharlal Nehru himself. He was, as influential in those days as Prime Minister Modi is today. But why did this society not fully internalize that ideology? Because there were other forces working quietly, silently at the grassroots, telling people that no, this is not ours. This is being imposed. Fair enough. Raja is doing it, but this is not what we are. That effort, which has gone on for decades on, in that I give a lot of credit to RSS, which has kept that spirit alive at the grassroots. Otherwise, societies, when generations change, can easily be influenced. Where was the ancient Greece today? Modern Greece is just a copy of the European civilization, not the original Greek civilization. Why? Because in the process, when those Western influences were being, the societies were being exposed to those Western influences, there was nobody to tell them that this is not what you are. Whereas in India, there was a strong movement which kept on telling people, reminding them about their roots, connecting them with their roots. So even the Raja's effort could not fully succeed. So when opportune moment came, when Raja also decided that no, this is the real identity of India, this is the path India should take, then very naturally the country has very automatically, very naturally adopted it and turned to it and stood by it. So while Raja, the changed Raja, the political establishment is definitely responsible in a way to take this cultural identity based on culture forward. The grassroots work that has happened in last so many decades cannot be and should not be ignored.
That's very important, and you very pointedly said that quietly there was a movement which was in a way progressing, but in recent years, I think that movement, and I'm specifically referring to RSS, is somehow also realizing that. And you also wrote a very interesting last notes in RSS, which was also very interesting essay. You were saying that they are also coming out in open and feeling the need to sort of engage. And is that a new form of RSS too? I mean, for years, I mean, when I was a student, I remember very few faces. You were one of them who would come and talk to media from the RSS, whether it is Hindi or English. But none other were much interested in doing that. There was a lot of secrecy, or probably behind. Nobody knew what actual thing was. But RSS has also sort of evolved from that. Do you think this is a new RSS under Mohan Bhagwat?
RSS has continued to evolve, not just under Manya Mohan Bhagwatji, but under successive Satsang Chalak, the organization has evolved and changed itself to suit the changing times. When Dr. Hedgewar was at the helm of affairs, the focus was more about securing independence first, and then ensuring that independent India remains a united India and the value system of this country is protected. But when it came into the hands of Param Pujaniya Guruji, the second chief, it took a slightly different direction. It became more of a cultural, spiritual, civilizational type of movement. Under Bala Sahib, it again acquired some kind of a political dimension. Under Raju Bhaiya, it acquired Seva dimension. Under Sudarshan ji, it acquired a massive intellectual dimension. So each Satsanga Chalak has added a significant dimension to ever evolving movement called the RSS. RSS is not a straight jacketed or a fixed ideology. It's an idea which has always evolved with changing times. Under Mohan Bhagwatji, there's no doubt, because I have at least worked under at least 4 Satsang Chalaks, including Mohan Bhagwatji. So I can say with my experience that there has a greater openness has certainly come. When I authored that article, I had no other intention to blame RSS or anything. It was only simply to say that this greater openness, which was the need of the hour, was definitely encouraged and taken forward by Sri Mohan Bhagwatji. He was the first Satsang Chalak to have a big meeting with ambassadors of 30 countries, having lunch with 30 countries, ambassadors of the countries, 30 countries, most of them are European countries. RSS had no role to do in Europe, but that RSS should engage with wider world was a new idea, appreciated. Then engaging with Muslims, engaging with other communities, engaging with adversaries. There is a new dimension called Visesh Samparka, under which Satsang Chalak ji regularly meets with people who have nothing to do with organization or ideology or anything, but they are prominent people in the society. So this kind of openness that has come in the RSS is a very, very important change that Bhagwatji has brought about in the functioning of the organization. Let me conclude by saying it works both ways. Some people think that it is good that RSS would be able to go reach out and influence new people, which is true, which is one way of looking at it. The other way is when you engage with wider society, you will also learn so many things.
That's
You will be able to refine your arguments. You will be able to refine your structure. You will be able to bring necessary changes in your own functioning. So let me end by saying, when Deng Xiaoping became the premier of Communist Party of China, the first thing he did was to send 15 teams into entire world to different countries. Each team was asked to spend 2 months in a country, study that country. His whole argument was, don't look at the color of the cat, whether it is a capitalist country or communist country is immaterial. Go see and learn good things from them, bring them to us. China needs many good ideas. So openness helps us in, of course, influencing those people, but also it's a great learning experience for all of us.
true. And I think that's very important. I'll almost come to the end, and I just wanted to ask this question. We discussed a lot about the the identity and how the nation and the contours of that have been. And you also mentioned how the process of actually making Indian society as a whole realize that identity was a long drawn process. The culmination of it could be the first term of Prime Minister Modi, which is why I want to ask this final question to you: that do you then see that Modi's prime ministership is in a way actualizing the idea of nation, which has been cultivated by RSS for long, and the CAA are sort of an indications of actualization of that conception? Do you see that process?
This nation's evolution in the long history of it was never about political leadership.
Mhm.
So if we use the word like culmination, I would say no. It's a product of the great reassertion that is happening in this ancient nation. It's a result of that. Here, definitely, the manifestation of the reassertion of the ancient Indian nationhood in the form of that great support that Prime Minister Modi enjoyed in 2014 and continues to enjoy to this day is definitely a reassuring thing for all of us, that ultimately the nation, which from Rishi Aurobindo, a spiritual giant, to Jawaharlal Nehru, a most materialist leader, both have envisaged the soul of the nation is awakening. Both have talked about it. That thing is today in front of our eyes, a manifestation of an awakened nation with its roots in its culture and civilization. The byproducts of it, you will see in the form of its political manifestation through leaders like Prime Minister Modi and many other things, many other areas in culture, in sports, in cinema. Everywhere you see this manifestation, this manifestation of this awakened nation. So culmination would be when we are able to mobilize the entire nation, or inspire the entire nation with that one grand idea of, if I were to borrow the phrase of the title of my book, Rashtra Sarvopari.
Right.
In this civilizational national concept ideology, the essence of it is that Rashtram, the spiritual, cultural identity of this nation, is the uppermost. We should all now work towards that, because this society still has to overcome several handicaps, several challenges: casteism, discrimination, religious differences. Many such issues still remain. While there is an appreciation, greater appreciation, wider appreciation of our cultural, civilizational identity, problems still exist. We need to overcome all those problems. That is or should be the way forward for all of us.
Thank you. I think on that note, I think that is a very positive note when you say that, okay, this is a process and the culmination will only happen when we have taken care of a lot of ills that are facing us. Interesting points, interesting observations. I think it was very insightful discussion today. I hope more articulation of this sorts actually come up. As you rightly pointed out, there is more openness within the RSS also. That also gives us students a lot of chance to study and also understand it. It was very pleasure talking to you, sir, today. I really enjoyed. I'm sure all of us have enjoyed. They have got their cues to study. Just just a parting line. Now you are also now beginning your beginning your term in the RSS. What kind of role are we expecting from Ram Madhav now? I think where will we be looking at Ram Madhav now?
No, in Sangha we have a statement, Jaha Kam Waha Ham. So where whatever responsibilities Sangha assigns to me, although certain responsibilities have been assigned to me, those responsibilities I will undertake now as a Sangha Pracharak.
Right. So coming home back, I think we wish you all the best. Thank you for joining us, and keep writing, because these kind of discourse, these kind of debates are going to sort of shape the public discourse in future. So thank you once again for joining us, sir.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you all of you for joining us today. Please like this video, share among your acquaintances, spread as much as you can. These kind of discourses, these kind of debates, we will be keeping on engaging with a lot of other peoples. For all those upsteps, do not forget to share our YouTube channel, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and please stay tuned for more. Thank you very much.